Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? That is part of Sonnet 18 by William Shakespeare. It's arguably one of his most famous. But here's a surprising fact. Researchers aren't sure if it was written about a woman or a man. The world's most popular romance writer, author of Romeo and Juliet, may have been queer. In recent years, his sexuality has been thrust into the spotlight. A collection of very personal sonnets show that there is a distinction between Shakespeare the man and Shakespeare the playwright. Experts on his life and on his work say it proves he's bisexual. Two of them leading that charge are Paul Edmonson and Sir Stanley Wells. They are the authors of all the Sonnets of Shakespeare, published by Cambridge University Press. We'll dive into it with them today on Gay History with Tom Ranzweiler. Paul Edmonson, Sir Stanley Wells, thank you so much for doing this and being here. I'm so thrilled you're here.
Thank you, Tom. It's a great pleasure.
Let's dive right in. William Shakespeare, if he were alive today, would he identify as a bisexual man?
Oh, yes, we both think he would, certainly, yes.
He might be amused that we now use such a term to describe how he clearly feels about men and women.
What evidence in these sonnets provide this theory that he would be bisexual today?
I think the most obvious signaling of his bisexuality comes in Sonnet 144. It begins, "Two loves I have, of comfort and despair, which like two spirits do suggest me still. The better angel is a man, right fair, the worser spirit, a woman, coloured ill."
And there are also two triangular love sequences among his sonnets, Tom. Sonnets 40, 41, and 42 are about the poet's friend having taken away the poet's mistress, and sonnets 133 and 134, which if we read them carefully, because it's not clear whether addressed to a male or a female, could even be about three men struggling in love for each other rather than two men and a woman.
And also Shakespeare addresses some of his male subjects in loving and intimate terms, calling him, for example, Lord of my love, sweet love, and my sweet boy.
He didn't want these published, right?
The research in our new book emphasizes that he was writing sonnets over at least 27 years, which sets his collection apart from the sequences of sonnets which were fashionable from 1591 to 1597. His weren't published till 1609.
Also, we strongly feel that some of the poems are so intimate, so private, that they clearly weren't written for public consumption. They read like private meditations in which he's working through his dilemmas about sex and his various objects of desire, both male and female. For example, in the first 17 of the sonnets, as published in 1609, he's unselfishly trying to persuade a young man whom he clearly adores to marry and to have children.
And the publication of the sonnets by Thomas Thorpe calls them Shakespeare's Sonnets, rather than say sonnets by William Shakespeare. The dedication in the book is written by the printer, not by the author. It's a third person publication. The dedicatee is referred to as Mr. W.H., and he's called the only begetter of these ensuing sonnets, which we understand to mean that Mr. W.H. procured the manuscript for the printer, and we think without Shakespeare's permission.
Overall, we think that these are private poems, and we suspect that Shakespeare was distressed, perhaps annoyed, about their being published, and that he resented their publication.
Wow. 14 of his sonnets are written clearly about men. Half of those, 7, are written about women. The other ones, such as Sonnet 18, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, which is so popular, unambiguous. We just don't know. When people first began reading these sonnets, was it clear to them that he was writing about a male interest or maybe several male interests?
Yes, thanks, Tom. So 14 of the 154 sonnets are unambiguously addressed to a male subject, man or boy. 13 more might be. 7 are unambiguously addressed to a female subject, and 2 more might be. Those sonnets which we can confidently say are addressed to either a male or a female, and not necessarily addressed to the same male or female. 8 more sonnets are about his relationship with men and women.
And for 2.5 centuries, it's largely been assumed that all 154 of those sonnets are addressed to only 2 people. The first, 126, to a so-called fair young man, and the others to a dark lady. Our edition shows that this way of reading the sonnets is wrong. These 154 remarkable poems are a far more miscellaneous collection than has been thought.
For a start, only 121 of them are addressed directly to people.
7 of them are addressed to abstract concepts, such as time or the poet's muse.
And 25 are personal meditations.
And 2 of them are translations. Sonnet 146 is a religious meditation too, and Sonnet 129 is a reflection about lust.
And your book makes it a point to identify the gender of each sonnet. And forgive me as I go through here, because I have so many bookmarks. As you can see, this book, when you order it, does not come with all the post-its on the top. But, reading some sonnets like Sonnet 66, which begins with, "Tired with all these, for restful death I cry." It's so powerful. But at the bottom, you make it a point to say, this is a meditation about all that's wrong with the world, which refers to a male or female loved one. Why was it so important for both of you to clarify the gender?
We were keen to do that because it'd never been done before. You believe it, after all these centuries reading Shakespeare's sonnets, and we genuinely felt it needed doing. We wanted to show the variety of Shakespeare's intentions and to expose the myths that have grown up around these poems. Some readers will look at our notes to a sonnet that they've always assumed to be addressed, say, to a man, and then realize that it could actually be addressed to either a man or a woman, like the sonnet you just referred to.
I do want to get into one sonnet that really struck me, Sonnet 20. Do you mind reading a little bit of Sonnet 20 and then dissecting it for us?
Yeah, I'm going to read all of it. A sonnet takes about a minute to read if you're not reading it too self-indulgently. So here goes. Sonnet 20. A woman's face, with nature's own hand painted, hast thou the master mistress of my passion. A woman's gentle heart, but not acquainted with shifting change, as is false women's fashion. An eye, more bright than theirs, less false in rolling, gilding the object whereupon it gazeth, a man in hue, all hues in his controlling, which steals men's eyes and women's souls amazeth. And for a woman wert thou first created, till nature, as she wrought thee, fell a doting, and by addition me of thee defeated, by adding one thing to my purpose, nothing. But since she pricked thee out for women's pleasure, mine be thy love, and thy love's use their treasure.
That was Sonnet 20, and the thumbnail sketch, which we print at the bottom of the sonnet, we do this for every sonnet in the volume. The thumbnail sketch for this one reads, "You look like both a man and a woman, and everyone is attracted to you. I can love you, but your love making is really for women."
And as I've just read, Shakespeare refers to his master mistress's one thing, i.e. his penis. His reference to the man being pricked out means that that person's he's addressing is set apart because nature has equipped him with a penis to give women pleasure. That's what he says in the sonnet.
But the poem works in the other direction too. The fact that Shakespeare seems so fascinated by the man's penis, even though he says he isn't, surely suggests subconscious, subtextual, sexual desire for the man.
So it shimmers with ambiguity and flirtation and eroticism, that poem.
Do we know who Shakespeare, the male in Shakespeare's life, or maybe the men that he was writing about? Do we know who it is?
No, we don't. And there was probably more than one. But in his dedication to his poem, The Rape of Lucrece in 1594, Shakespeare, aged 30, publicly expresses love for the 21-year-old Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton. And he writes, "The love I dedicate to your lordship is without end. What I have done is yours. What I have to do is yours. Being part in all I have, devoted yours."
When Shakespeare wrote that, Wriothesley had just come of age. He was 9 years younger than Shakespeare, and in at least one of his surviving portraits, painted about this time, he looks like a woman. In fact, the portrait was for many years thought to be a portrait of a woman. It was only identified as male about 20 years ago. It has long hair and feminine features.
If we're trying to imagine a real person to whom Sonnet 20 is addressed, then Wriothesley seems to be the man.
Wow. So some people may be hearing this, and they may be listening, and they may be discovering the fact that Shakespeare was indeed bisexual for the first time. But they may also be thinking, wait a second, doesn't William Shakespeare have a wife and some kids at home? What about them?
Well, in a way, that's one of the outcomes of being bisexual, one could say. Some of the sonnets are about and addressed to men. Some are about and addressed to women. One of the sonnets is addressed to his future wife.
That one is number 145. It's a wooing sonnet, and it ends with the lines, "I hate, from hate away she threw, and saved my life, saying, not you." Now, hate away was a sort of pronunciation of Hathaway, the maiden name of the woman that Shakespeare married. We might even hear the name Anne in the last line, "and saved my life." It's a personal sonnet. It was written round about the time that William and Anne married in 1582, when Shakespeare was only 18.
So we can even find Shakespeare's wife among these poems.
So your book really stresses the variety of Shakespeare's sonnets. Could you just give us some examples of these?
Two sonnets, the last two printed in 1609 collection 153 and 154, are translations of a classical poem about Cupid. These might look back, we think, to his own schoolboy exercises.
Two of the sonnets are letters. Sonnet 26 seems to have accompanied another longer piece of writing. Sonnet 77 to have accompanied the gift of an almanac, a sort of pocket diary.
And two other sonnets, sonnets 50 and 51, are written while Shakespeare's riding a horse, as he often did whilst commuting between Stratford-upon-Avon and London.
Some of the sonnets are lyrical, others are knotty and challenging. His collection contains poems about mortality, regret, self-hatred, guilt, and jealousy, as well as about joy and gratitude.
So a really varied collection of poems written over a long time period.
Picking up on that, there's one sonnet that we had discussed previously before, chatting here officially, and that was Sonnet 136. And I'm going to read it for you, and I beg for patience, because you did such a beautiful job with Sonnet 20. I am not as gorgeous of a Shakespearean reader as you are. "If thy soul check thee that I come so near, swear to thy blind soul that I was thy will, and will thy soul knows is admitted there. Thus far for love, my love's sweet, sweet fulfill. Will fulfill the treasure of thy love. I fill it full with wills, and my will one. In things of great receipt, with ease we prove. Among a number one is a reckoned none. Then in the number let me pass untold. Though in thy store's account I one must be, for nothing hold me, so it please thee hold, that nothing, me a something, sweet to thee, make but my name thy love, and love that still, and then thou lovest me, for my name is Will." And here he's the snapshot that you provide. My name, my desire, my penis want to fill you entirely. So he's talking about Will, but again, he's talking about Will. This,
Yeah, I mean the modern Willie, right? So
yes.
that what you've just said and how we've summarized it, you know, that's absolutely true. Shakespeare's sonnets are far more sexually laden than any other sonnets of the period.
Absolutely.
Because most of the others are idealizing a beloved woman. Shakespeare, if you're thinking about women in the collection for a moment, Shakespeare presents his mistress in sonnet 130 with feet of clay. And there's a promiscuous woman in sonnet 137, and there's a lying woman in sonnet 138.
Wow.
We've just heard Sonnet 136, which ends with, "For my name is Will." And Shakespeare puns on his own name there in relation to sexual passion and to his own sexual organ. He also puns on his first name, Will, in several other sonnets, 22, 57, 89, 134, 135, 143.
I think that mentioning of his own first name, not only in the one you read, Tom, but across some of the others in the collection, really signals to us that these have Shakespeare's fingerprints on them, his identity, his DNA, if you like. And therefore, you know, we think about Shakespeare as a highly romanticized figure, perhaps in a film like Shakespeare in Love, but in fact, the Shakespeare of Shakespeare's sonnets is miles away from that kind of lover that's portrayed in that film, because some of these sonnets, although the one you read is very playful, it's also quite sexually, you know, possibly nauseating, surreal, possibly. And he's often writing out of anguish and despair in these poems as well.
It's almost as if he's on the psychiatrist's couch, investigating himself, discovering about his own most interior feelings.
Were you guys surprised by the reaction from the LGBT community when you first came out and said it's clear Shakespeare was a bisexual man?
Well, the way in which we've presented Shakespeare's sonnets in our new edition has been gratefully received by the LGBTQ plus community. Some of them have expressed surprise at the degree to which it's clear Shakespeare is expressing sexual feelings for both men and women. Others have known this truth deep down for many years and are kind of pleased to have it confirmed.
And we'd even suggest that Shakespeare's bisexuality is in part the reason that he's such a great writer. It accounts for his genius. He has this ability to enter into the feelings of both men and of women, of gay men and of straight men, and of men who desire both men and women.
Let me finish on this point that we were making earlier, that these sonnets are deeply personal, not something that really Shakespeare wanted published. Do you think Shakespeare would be happy to know how popular his sonnets are today?
Well, because we think he didn't want them published in the first place, we think he's very likely to would be dismayed at how these essentially private poems are being read. And he'd probably be upset that they've been misunderstood for so long.
Still, we hope he would be delighted that our new book has set the record straight, so to speak.
How Shakespearean of you. What a great note to end this on. Sir Stanley Wells Paul Edmonson, thank you so much for both being here and doing this.
You're very welcome, Tom. Thanks for inviting us.